Joan lived an apparently perfect life beside her husband, Steve. They were a happy couple, sharing dreams and plans for the future. However, a fateful accident would change everything, and Joan was about to discover the true face of her husband. Joan and Steve had been married for just over 2 years. Their meeting happened unexpectedly at the company where they both worked. Joan, freshly out of a long and painful relationship, was emotionally fragile. On the other hand, Steve was known for his ability to win hearts and saw in Joan a new challenge. Their relationship quickly developed, and shortly thereafter, they decided to take a step forward by choosing to live together. Marriage then became the natural consequence of their union. In the eyes of others, everything seemed perfect, a happy and passionate couple. However, behind appearances, their relationship was marked by jealousy and demands. Steve, accustomed to superficial relationships where beauty and status were of great importance, couldn't avoid certain behaviors that undermined the couple's trust and harmony. His past as a charmer still seemed to dictate how he behaved and interacted with those around him, especially other women. Gradually, Joan began to realize there was an imbalance between what she expected from a relationship and the reality she lived with Steve. The constant demands, lack of trust, and excessive focus on appearances started to shake her self-esteem and make her question the true meaning of love. Steve, immersed in his past of superficial relationships, insisted on imposing appearance standards on Joan, expecting her to always stay in good shape, well-dressed, and impeccably groomed. For him, image was crucial in all situations, as if they were constantly playing a role of perfection. This excessive demand from Steve started to deeply trouble Joan. She felt her self-esteem was being harmed as her appearance became the central focus of their interactions, to the detriment of other important aspects of their relationship. Even simple tasks, such as a trip to the market, required Joan to be concerned about her appearance under Steve's watchful eye. Joan longed for a relationship where both partners could mutually support each other, regardless of superficial appearances, and build a more authentic and meaningful connection. Joan, a vibrant and energetic young woman, had always been passionate about physical activities. Her active and adventurous personality led her to constantly dress practically, ready for any situation that involved sports. In her car, she carried a backpack with a pair of sneakers, shorts, and t-shirts because one never knew when the opportunity for a run, a nature hike, or an impromptu soccer game might arise. However, as her relationship with Steve began to develop, Joan realized that this fundamental part of her identity was being pushed aside. Steve, with his taste for formalities, wanted her to become a more conventional person, aligned with his own preferences and expectations. Moreover, he demonstrated jealousy towards the friends with whom Joan practiced sports, fearing that they might pose a threat to their relationship. Influenced by her desire to please Steve, and in the hope that this was just a passing phase at the beginning of their relationship, Joan gradually gave up her passion for sports and the freedom she felt when connecting with nature and her active body. She sacrificed her own essence to meet her partner's expectations and desires. As time went by, Joan began to feel a void in her heart. The absence of her physical activities and the lack of connection with her true self started to weigh heavily on her. Joan realized that even with little time into their marriage, the differences between her and Steve were becoming increasingly evident and difficult to ignore. Their personalities, expectations, and values diverged in many aspects, causing conflicts and emotional strain. Even so, she believed that despite the adversities, it was possible to overcome the differences and build a solid and lasting relationship. She was willing to face the challenges of marriage head-on rather than give up prematurely. It was the end of the year, a time of celebration and camaraderie at the company where Joan and Steve worked. A large party was meticulously organized to mark the end of yet another cycle and to celebrate the incredible results achieved by the company throughout the year. During the company's celebration, the much-awaited moment arrived. The tribute to employees who stood out and achieved great results throughout the year. Joan, as the leader of the sales department, was among those honored, promptly recognized for her exceptional performance. While the audience applauded and congratulated Joan for her accomplishments, an uncomfortable feeling began to arise in Steve's heart. A sense of envy, fueled by his own insecurity and wounded ego, started to dominate him. He couldn't admit that his wife was surpassing him professionally. At a certain point, Joan noticed Steve's absence from the main hall, and a sense of unease took over her. Concerned about her husband's whereabouts, she began asking her colleagues if anyone knew where he was. However, no one seemed to have any information on his whereabouts. Determined to find Steve, Joan decided to explore the area outside the hall, following indications that someone had seen him there. With a tightened heart, she walked quickly, trying to understand what might be happening. Upon reaching the outside area, Joan was met with a scene that left her completely bewildered. There, she found Steve in a compromising situation with a coworker. The reality that unfolded before her eyes was devastating, a painful and unexpected betrayal. Shocked and speechless, Joan was paralyzed in the face of the blatant betrayal. Tears began to stream down her face, mingling with perplexity and pain. As Steve began to grasp the reality of the situation, he realized that his affair with the coworker had been discovered. Trying to avoid a public scandal, he acted swiftly, grabbing Joan by the arm and dragging her towards the car. Inside the car, Joan remained in a state of shock. She then found the strength to ask the most difficult question, why? Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he blames Joan. He accuses her of being relaxed and overly focused on work, claiming she wasn't prioritizing the relationship. These unfair accusations leave Joan even more hurt and confused. She wonders how someone can transfer the responsibility of betrayal onto the victim, making her question if she really knew the man she married. In the midst of her pain and perplexity, Joan finds the courage to express her feelings. She argues that even with work demands, she always tried to balance her personal and professional responsibilities. She recalls that marriage is a partnership of mutual support and that difficulties should be faced together, not used as a justification for betrayal. As the tension between Joan and Steve reaches its peak, the argument intensifies. Steve's irritation grows as Joan voices her legitimate concerns and grievances. In the midst of this emotionally charged atmosphere, Steve's attention is completely diverted from the road. In a moment of distraction and agitation, he veers into the opposite lane, not noticing a truck coming his way. In a desperate attempt to avoid a collision, Steve makes a sharp maneuver but ends up violently hitting another car in that lane. The impact of the crash is devastating. The side where Joan was sitting is directly struck, causing severe damage and injuries. The sound of the collision is deafening, echoing the tragedy that has just occurred. Amidst the chaos and anguish, Steve manages to crawl out of the car with only minor injuries. The driver of the other vehicle also seems to be fine, but Joan remains unconscious inside the car, trapped by the wreckage. The situation worsens as the cars begin to catch fire, increasing the imminent danger. Paralyzed, Steve stands motionless, watching the tragedy unfold before his eyes as the fire rapidly approaches. The driver of the other vehicle, driven by the instinct to save lives, overcomes his own fear and despair. He realizes there is still someone inside the car, and his courage compels him to act. Even with visibility compromised by the dense smoke, he risks himself, heading towards the vehicle, determined to free Joan from the wreckage distorted by the collision. Amid the darkness and intense heat, the driver of the other vehicle battles against time and imminent danger. He manages to remove Joan from the wreckage, carrying her in his arms with incredible bravery. The driver emerges from the cloud of smoke, bringing Joan with him. As the driver of the other vehicle places Joan carefully on the ground, his own deteriorated physical condition finally catches up with him. The serious burns he sustained during the rescue attempt begin to affect his ability to remain conscious and resist the intense pain. With one final effort, he lies down beside Joan, both facing a critical situation. At this crucial moment, the sound of sirens draws near, and the rescue teams arrive on the scene. Every minute is vital in this race against time. As Joan and the driver of the other vehicle are placed in the ambulances, the hope for survival mingles with fear and uncertainty about the future. After weeks of an intense battle in the hospital, Joan finally awakens from her unconscious state. As she opens her eyes, she finds herself surrounded by silence and solitude. The physical pain still lingers. When inquiring about Steve's whereabouts, Joan discovers that no one at the hospital has updated information on him. The realization that his visits had not been frequent adds to the sense of loneliness and abandonment she was already facing. Noticing Joan's concern and her need for contact with Steve, a member of the hospital staff offers to try to reach out to him. The doctor explains that Joan sustained severe injuries in the accident, including significant burns to her body. He shares details about the medical procedures performed to stabilize her and treat her injuries. With careful sincerity, the doctor also discusses the challenges Joan may face during her recovery. He mentions the healing process of the burns and the importance of physical therapy and rehabilitation sessions to help her regain mobility and physical strength. With delicacy, the doctor shares with Joan information about the healing process of the burns on her body and the possibility of future cosmetic procedures to minimize the visual aspects. However, to the doctor's surprise, Joan demonstrates that her concern is not centered on physical appearance. She emphasizes that at this moment, her primary priority is her health, well-being, and overall recovery. The doctor also shares details about Joan's rescue, highlighting the courageous and selfless action of the stranger, the driver of the other vehicle involved in the accident. He describes how this person risked his own safety to save her, showing genuine compassion amidst the chaos. As she listens to this emotional story, Joan feels a mix of gratitude and admiration for the unknown person who rescued her. Despite the difficulty and pain Joan still feels, her desire to express her gratitude to the driver who saved her is unwavering. Determined, she is assisted by the hospital staff to move in a wheelchair to the adjacent room where the driver is admitted. Each movement is accompanied by a wave of pain, but Joan finds strength in the gratitude that overflows in her heart. Upon entering the driver's room, Joan finds an environment similar to her own: medical monitors, intensive care equipment, and a climate of recovery. She sees the driver lying in bed, still facing the pain and challenges of the burn healing process. With emotion in her eyes, Joan thanks the driver for his act of courage and compassion. She expresses her deep gratitude for finding him in a moment of despair, saving her life when she needed it most. As Joan returns to her room, her surprise is immense when she encounters Steve in the hospital corridor. He is unscathed, with no visible injuries from the accident. Their eyes meet, and a mix of emotions fills the atmosphere. The possibility of talking and addressing unresolved issues arises before her. However, all hope crumbles when Steve approaches without hesitation or care for Joan's emotions. With harsh and cold words, he reveals his intention to say goodbye to her. Without preamble, he explains that he cannot overlook Joan's physical appearance and that he cannot remain by her side. Steve's words cut deep. As he continues to speak, Joan tries to process the whirlwind of emotions. The betrayal, abandonment, and lack of consideration for her pain leave her with a feeling of profound sadness and disillusionment. A special connection begins to develop between her and the unknown driver who saved her, Marco. In each physical therapy session, Joan and Marco's gazes meet, conveying an understanding that goes beyond words. They know what it means to face pain, frustration, and the difficulty of regaining lost mobility and strength. The friendship between Joan and Marco becomes a bright light amidst the darkness of the past and the disappointments they have experienced. They find comfort in each other, sharing laughter, tears, and hopes for a better future. However, the time comes when Marco is discharged from the hospital, as his recovery has progressed enough to continue the process at home. Joan, while happy for him and grateful to have met him, feels a pang of loss and loneliness in her chest. Marco's departure triggers in Joan the memory of other losses she has faced recently. The absence of Steve, the abandonment, and the betrayal she experienced still echo in her mind. The feeling of losing his support base again in a moment of vulnerability is overwhelming. But Marco was different from Steve. He continued to visit Joan even after his discharge from the hospital, providing her with a source of relief and comfort. And the relationship that began amidst a tragedy developed into a true love that went beyond physical appearance. In Marco, Joan found everything she had wished for. And from this relationship, two adorable children arrived, bringing a new dimension of love and gratitude to their relationship. And it was in this context that Joan experienced an encounter with her past. While she and her family enjoy a quiet lunch at a restaurant, a familiar face catches her attention. Among the people around, Joan recognizes the figure of Steve. His impeccable appearance, elegant clothing, and quest for apparent perfection are witnesses to the life he continued to lead. However, upon closer observation, Joan notices a subtle change in Steve. His vacant and dull eyes, coupled with the fact that he is having lunch alone, indicate that the relentless pursuit of perfection did not bring him the satisfaction he expected. In the face of this scene, a feeling of relief and joy floods Joan's heart. She realizes that her life, full of scars and imperfections, is exactly what makes her happy. She understands that true beauty and happiness lie in accepting herself and in the love for her family. With a smile on her lips and a heart filled with gratitude, Joan continues to embrace her life, full of scars and imperfections, knowing that this is exactly how she wants to live.